And welcome to today's webinar, which is Purpose and a Paycheck with Chris Farrell. My name is Marissa Smith, and I'm with the University of Minnesota Alumni Association. I'm so happy you joined us today. Before we get started with today's presentation, I have just a couple of announcements for you. So first of all, I want to mention that initiatives like our alumni webinar series are made possible by our Alumni Association members. So if you're tuning in today as a member, thank you so much. And if you're interested in learning more about membership, becoming a member, and supporting our work, check us out at umnalumni.org/membership. And also, because you're tuning in today, I assume you're interested in lifelong learning and further career development. So we have a couple of other webinars coming up that you might be interested in listed here. Our next one is on October 15th, and it's all about your online personal brand with Jennifer Radke of the National Institute of Social Media. Following that, on October 29th, we have a 2006 grad from CLA, Liz Carlisle, talking about self-care and the key to success, and she's got some really interesting and important personal stories in that regard. And then on December 10th, we have Passion, Purpose, and Authenticity. What the heck am I supposed to do with my life? From a 2019 grad, Jesse Byer. So maybe in some ways it's the counterpart to today's presentation, which is also about purpose. So if you want to learn more and register for those, you can do that at umnalumni.org/virtual. And then finally, I want to share just a couple of technical things about today's webinar. For those of you who have joined us in the past, you may notice we're on a new platform here. We've moved from GoToWebinar to Zoom. So hopefully it's been a smooth transition for you as well. But a couple of things, you've probably joined by default listening on your computers, speakers, but if you want, you can also listen over the phone. This is a great option if you need to take the webinar on the road. So to do that, you just can click the caret button in the lower left corner and dial in. Information will be displayed. And then you also can submit questions via the Zoom platform using the Q&A button. And you can submit them anytime. Chris will be stopping, I believe, about halfway through to encourage you to continue submitting them, and we'll answer them as we go. So with that, I'm very excited to turn it over. We almost didn't start on time because our conversation beforehand was so interesting. But we have a senior economics contributor, Marketplace, and economics commentator from Minnesota Pubic Radio, as well as a columnist for PBS and the Star Tribune, and author of 5 books on personal finance, including his most recent book and the topic of today's webinar, Purpose and a Paycheck: Finding Meaning, Money, and Happiness in the Second Half of Life. So I'm very pleased to welcome Chris Farrell, and I'm going to turn it over to him now to get us started with today's presentation.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and thank you to everybody who is listening to this, or maybe listening to it later on when you sit down at your computer. I really appreciate it. And yes, the book is Purpose and a Paycheck. And if I were to summarize the theme of the book, it's about the positive economics of an aging population. And I really would love to get your questions, and please just set them up at any time, and then we'll start dealing with them. But one of the inspirations for the book was an essay by the late economist John Kenneth Galbraith. And he wrote this essay called Notes on Aging, and it's in the Encyclopedia Britannica. And what he talked about was this association of aging with decline and uselessness. And he called it the Still syndrome. And he said that, the Still syndrome was afflicted to him by people who were nearing retirement or were sort of more middle-aged. And they would see him and they would say, I see you're still exercising. Are you still working? Still having a drink. And the most dramatic general expression of the Still syndrome came from a friend who we hadn't seen for years, who said, I can hardly believe you're still alive. Now, he wrote that essay when he was 90 years old, and he continued to write and contribute to our public discussion into economics for another 7 years. Now, on the screen, let's see, that's what the cover of the book looks like. On the screen, though, is a quote from Ben Bernanke when he was Federal Reserve Board Chairman in 2006. And what he says is, in coming decades, many forces will shape our economy and our society, but in all likelihood, no single factor will have as pervasive an effect as the aging of our population. So the aging of our population is where we shape transportation networks, our housing markets, the health delivery system. And what I focus on is the transformation of entrepreneurship in work in the second half of life, and then people staying engaged in the labor market. And just to throw out one number, which I'll mention several other times, the 55 to 64-year-old age group accounted for 26% of new entrepreneurs in 2017. And that's up from 15% back in 1996. But when you mentioned about the demographics of this aging population, and here's just one striking number that we can sort of encapsulate it. The US Census Bureau predicts the number of people 65 years of age and older will outnumber children under 18 and under for the first time in US history in 2035. And the demographics of an aging population, it just sort of fuels these ominous forecasts that come out of Washington, D.C. and Wall Street, and the core idea behind the typical reaction of doom and gloom is that you're going to have too few young workers supporting too many dependent elderly. And the well springs of creativity, of innovation, what drives our economy forward is going to fall into decline because older people aren't creative, they're not innovative. And so we're going to slip into this slow state of economic growth that just won't offer up enough to support our pensions and what our economy and our government does. And plus, by the way, older adults, they're cantankerous. They don't understand new technologies. They're frail, they're failing, and all that. So you know that new narrative. But here's the thing. There's a very different narrative about aging that is being written. And an aging population is not ready to move to society's periphery. They want to stay relevant, and they have a lot to offer. And I call this grassroots social movement that's rethinking, reimagining the second half of life. I call it Unretirement. Other names, Encore. You probably heard of the term Encore. The British like the term third age, next chapter. Those are some other words that are out there. But whatever you call it, experienced workers offer the promise and the possibility of rejuvenating our organizations and our economy. And that is the thesis of the book, that it is with an aging population that we can have healthier economic growth and we can have more wealth. So when you hear aging, think smart, productive, and engaged. And the upside for the economy, just to give you one idea. So Americans 50 and over account for 7.6 trillion of direct spending and related economic activity. And more Americans than ever are turning to working longer. And so the chart that you're seeing, as you can see, labor force participation rate, those 55 and older, it bottomed out. And it really was, for men, it was a 100-year-old trend toward retiring earlier and earlier, bottomed out in the early 1990s. Now for women, it's a slightly different trajectory because women always worked, but more and more coming into the paid labor market. But however you look at it, people are continuing to work longer. They're staying engaged in the workforce longer. And there's a series of trends that are reinforcing and feeding off one another, mostly positive, some negative. So we're healthier. On average, of course, we're healthier and we're better educated on average. And, when you think about diversity and inclusion and the advantages of having a diverse workforce and having an inclusive workforce, more and more we're starting to realize that includes experience, that includes aging. Older workers in the US, they have, similar lower injury or illness rates than their younger counterparts. And as I said, they're better educated than previous generations. Plus, it's one thing if we were having this conversation and we're back in the 1950s, 1960s, when smokestack America dominated, and we're talking the factory and mining and farming and fishing. Today, it's an economy dominated by information, services. And so, it's much easier to continue to work longer if you're, working in a medical diagnostics office than if you're working in a mine. The workplace, and this is one of the things I think more and more we come to recognize, is that the workplace is a social institution. You would think with work it would be income, but that people miss. But there are all these surveys that are done, and they ask people who are retired, what do you most miss when you look back. And you would think income would be number one on that list, right? You know, it's not. It's on the list, but it's actually pretty far down. What's always number one on that list? Colleagues, vendors, suppliers, the people I worked with. And so the workplace is a social institution. The other thing is, you know, people spend years and they gain knowledge, they gain experience, and the notion that at some age, 62, 63, 65, that you want to walk away from all your skill, all your knowledge, all your experience, and never tap into it again. You know, more and more people just don't think that that is particularly attractive, because all of us at our core, we want to be useful. And one of the ways to be useful is we tap into our knowledge and into our experience. Now, the other thing is, we have a lousy retirement savings system in the United States. It has so many holes. It's just hard for people to save. We know, for example, that the only people who can save for their retirement years are if they work at a place that has an employer-sponsored retirement savings plan. If you don't have an employer-sponsored retirement savings plan, you're probably not going to be saving. And I don't need to tell you, life is expensive. Kids are really expensive. It's expensive to buy a home. So it's not surprising that many people end up in their 50s and early 60s without much in savings, if anything. And so again, this lack of retirement savings is another reason why people are continuing to work. Now, the personal finances of continuing to work well into the traditional retirement years, they're really good. I mean, they even earning a slim paycheck in your retirement years can make a big difference. I mean, for one thing, earnings allows you to add your savings, or at least you don't have to tap into your retirement savings. And here's one way to think about it. Say you earn $20,000 in part-time income during your retirement years. That's the equivalent of a 4% withdrawal rate from a $500,000 portfolio. And I use the 4% because that's one of those rules of thumb that's out there when people always say, how much can I take out of my 403B or my 401k without worrying too much about running out of money? And your starting place is 4%. Of course, you adjust it for your individual circumstances and all that, but it's a good rule of thumb to use. And 10,000 in part-time income, that's the same as the 4% withdrawal rate on a $250,000 portfolio. So that just use that to illustrate that there is some real power to continuing to earn an income. Now, what it also means is that your money compounds longer. Fact is, you have to support yourself for a shorter period of time off your retirement savings. And here's the real impact for the typical worker. It makes it practical to delay filing for Social Security. And I think we sort of need to change our conversation about Social Security. So if you file for the benefit at age 70, which is the last year for filing, age 70 versus age 62, which is the first year to file, the benefit's more than 75% larger at age 70 versus age 62. Now, I've done this all the time. We all do it. People say, well, when can I file for Social Security? You say, well, you file at age 62, and then you can file all the way up and delay all the way up to age 70. I think we sort of need to reframe this conversation to say, look, when can you file for Social Security? Age 70. But if for health reasons, or you really need the money to pay the bills, you can file at 68, you can file at 66, you can file at age 62. So sort of start at age 70. It's good that you can file at 62, but that's where I would frame my discussion. But really that's where, in all the studies, it's coming from the Urban Institute, wherever the studies are coming from, that delay filing for Social Security really does make a difference. Now, I'm going to go back for 1 second. Now, what kind of work are people going to be doing? As I mentioned, it's probably not factory work, right? It's going to be in the social services sector, the service sector, the less physically demanding parts of the economy. And what most people do is they continue to use their skills, their knowledge, what they've been doing over the years. There's this story that's out there, and it's a lot of fun about, reinventing yourself. So you've been working in a cubicle and for 30 years, and then you take a vacation out to Napa Valley. And you're with a friend, and you're sitting in a restaurant and you're drinking this wine, and you just start to spin a tale about how you could make this sustainable organic wine be incredible. These venture capitalists are sitting next to you and they say, I love your idea. Here's millions of dollars to go out, make your sustainable organic wine. And you do that. And the next thing you know, you're on the cover of Business Week magazine. Okay, maybe that happens. But for most of us, it's about taking our existing skills, our existing knowledge. And a lot of times what people want to do is move into a different sector of the economy, which is why that term encore is out there, an encore career. And one of the really popular moves is going from the for-profit sector or the professional sector into not-for-profit work. And again, when you're doing that, what you're realizing is I'm thinking about my skills and staying engaged in meeting new people, and having a purpose there from doing and getting a little bit of excitement about doing something very different. Now, go back to this one. So this is Matisse. Now, one of the things that is really important, there are so many stereotypes out there about older workers, right? They're stuck in their ways. They don't want to, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. They don't want to learn these new technologies, and this is what we're told. And these are negative stereotypes. These negative stereotypes are so wrong. The scholarly evidence, and there is a lot of scholarly evidence out there that shows that in many cases, creativity continues to grow as you age. If you might have read, or some of you might have read, a wonderful speech by the late Steve Jobs. It was in 2005, I believe, Stanford University commencement address. And it has one of the things that he highlights is the importance of being able to connect the dots. But what he says is you can't connect the dots looking ahead. You can only connect the dots looking back. Now, that's critical to creativity. It's also critical to wisdom, and it's what experience really does show. So, and back in 2016, I think it was, I went to New York, and there was the Museum of Modern Art had this special exhibit on Henri Matisse's cutouts. So those are the Pool, the Blue Nude series. As you can see, he revived what children do and turned it into what's considered the height of his creativity. And he did the cutouts from age 74 to 84 from the wheelchair and from his bed. And Matisse, if you look at his career, got more and more creative with the passage of time. And the thing is, when you start looking at the skilled trades, same story. Many professions, same story. And when my family, we lived, growing up, part of the time we lived in Germany. And so my little sister and I, we were young, and we loved the Little House on the Prairie stories. And, we read them, and, it wasn't published until she was 65. And really, she didn't start writing seriously until her late 50s. And so you can go, example after example, where people become more creative with time. The other thing is older workers are productive workers. And there's a wonderful series of studies that come out of the Max Planck Institute in Germany. Axel Busch Chopin. His name, I always feel I don't quite get the German quite right, but Chopin and colleagues at the Max Planck Institute for the Center for the Economics of Aging. And they got access to a Mercedes-Benz truck factory. So now we're on a factory floor. And what they did was they measured productivity, and productivity was basically built around the error rate. And what they found is that worker productivity peaked at retirement. What they also found, and this is, I think, extremely important for business, is the most productive teams are multi-generational, because the older workers made fewer mistakes, younger workers made more mistakes. But the younger workers also have a certain amount of energy, can kind of run around. The older ones are kind of like, well, wait a minute, I've been in this circumstance before. So you have this multi-generational team, which makes so much sense if you just think about it for 2 or 3 seconds, and yet it's considered a radical idea at this particular point in time. They did the same study in a German large insurance company, and they found the exact same results. And so when I was interviewing Axel, when he was at a conference in Washington, D.C., the way he summarized his research is, experience pays. The other thing is, let's just get rid of this notion that experienced workers don't want to learn. I mean, there's so many surveys out there. Just to give you one, this is the ARP Work and Career Study Survey. More than 8 in 10 workers ages 45 to 64 say the opportunity to learn something new is critical to their view of an ideal job. And here's another number. They want to give you another number with, I think, a similar message. So as I mentioned, the 55 to 64-year age group accounted for 26% of new startups. 2017, that's up from nearly 15% in 1996. And that's according to the Kaufman Foundation. But if you think about entrepreneurship, it's creative. It's a creative enterprise. And there are a lot of reasons why experienced workers are attracted to entrepreneurship. Because we think about that, right? It's youth, the young. Those are the entrepreneurs. Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, Jack Dorsey of Twitter, Bill Gates of Microsoft for an earlier era in the late Steve Jobs. But it is the 55 to 64-year age group that is really creating a lot of new businesses. Now, I want to be really clear about one thing. You are not risking your 401k or your 403b to your entrepreneurial genius. Most of these businesses are starting out very small, $5,000 or less. So leave the 401k alone. Just leave it. Don't touch it. And the home is the office, or a co-sharing workspace, which is a wonderful innovation that's out there. And many of the businesses are solo enterprises. They're very small. There's a fascinating trend that's going on. One of the things in our economy that is happening is, and you probably have all noticed this, craft and artisan work used to be sort of in the tributaries of our society and economy, and now it's really mainstream. And one of the things that I've come across, I don't have any data, and I have not found any data that supports this. It's anecdotal. It's just that I think that the anecdotal data is right, is in this craft and artisan business. In particular, you are having multi-generational enterprises, often a family enterprise. So the parents have retired, and their millennial or Gen X children have an idea, and they come together, and what they're bringing is, typically the parents are bringing a little bit of capital, some experience, some contacts. The younger generation is bringing ambition, and they're probably burdened by student loans, so they didn't have that much capital to start, but they have ambition, and they have some tech savvy, and the combination is really powerful, and it's very, very exciting. But I went down to, as part of the research for the book, I went down to Sarasota, Florida. And Jean Cannon, at that time, she was in her early 70s. She'd retired from IBM. And when I walked into her townhome, she was sort of laughing because she was trying to learn WordPress. She'd already mastered MailChimp, and she'd, Facebook, and she had Twitter, and a couple of other software programs, but she was working on WordPress. And what she was laughing was just saying that, when I was at IBM, I would call somebody up to say, okay, so how do I do this? She says, now I have to learn it on my own. Now think about this. That's not the stereotypical image, but my argument is she's the norm, in the sense of the continuing to learn, wanting to learn, being able to learn. So what she was trying to create was an entrepreneurial ecosystem, a platform for an entrepreneurial ecosystem in Sarasota, Florida, which has an older than median population for the US, and sort of create this platform so that she would bring in some of the older entrepreneurs, experienced entrepreneurs, but younger entrepreneurs seeing that there's an opportunity here in Sarasota. So it was a really interesting, mix of what she was trying to do. And then for the book, I also went to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I went to this co-sharing workspace, which had been a Ford dealership, and it's in downtown Tulsa. And I met with Julie Skye, and she'd been in the financial services industry for a long time, and she was really wanted to work in more of green investing, right? And that didn't go over real well in your established financial services firms in Tulsa, which is really an oil and gas area. So she went off on her own. She had her clients. She had her office, a little office in the co-sharing workspace. The cost of setting up a business with technology has gone way down. She was making an okay income, and she was in her 60s, and she was probably going to work through her clients, and that would take her from there 10, 15 years, but she loved what she was doing, and the whole notion of investing with your values was really important to her. It was important to her clients. And so I think these are the kinds of stories why entrepreneurship is growing so much. Now, whether it's in the workplace or it's entrepreneurship, one of the things that we really have to fight is age discrimination. Age discrimination is real. And so this is from a study that was done by the EEOC, and the source of state of age discrimination in older workers in the US, 50 years after the Age Discrimination in Employment Act, ADEA. It's really worth looking at because age discrimination is real, it's out there, it's pervasive. There was a survey by the AARP. They surveyed these workers 45 and older, and 3 in 5 experienced workers had witnessed or confronted age discrimination on their own. So a big part of this is we need to confront age discrimination. We need to be open about it. And that's one of the big civil rights issues of our era. Here's those, what I call modicum of good news. Here's the modicum of good news, which is the tight labor market. And so we have this tight labor market, and everyone here has probably heard management's complaining we can't find the skilled labor that we need. Of course, my reaction always is, well, wait a second. There's a line of workers, 50 plus, who can probably do this job really well. And what's happening is we are starting to see it. I mean, people are opening their minds. The labor force participation rate, as you saw from an earlier slide, has gone up. And so because of this tight labor market, we are seeing a shift in the discussion from when are you going to retire to how can I retain you? And it hasn't gone fast enough, it hasn't gone far enough, but it is out there. And there was a study, there was a magazine called Enterprise in Minnesota, and they were telling a story of as Minnesota has a very strong, medium-sized, high-skill machining industry. And there was this company, and they were investing in automation. They were not investing in automation to eliminate workers. They're investing in automation to keep their skilled older workers around longer, because they were making good hires out of the community college system, but they needed those older workers to fulfill the contracts and in order to train the younger generation. So I think that this tight labor market is making a difference, and my hope is that what we're going to see is more and more companies willing, more and more organizations willing to think about phased retirement, institutionalizing part-time work, figuring out how to retain the skill and the experience rather than thinking these are people we want to get out the door. And the change is happening, just not fast enough. So what does this mean for individuals? What about for people? And I think this unretirement has real implications for how you think about the second half of life, the last third of life, the third age. And don't get me wrong, savings is important. But I think the most important question, we've gone through a period of time. The last 3 decades has been the era of the 401k, right? So are you saving enough for retirement? Have you saved for retirement? How much do you put into mutual funds? How much do you put in stocks? How much goes into bonds? And all that is important. But what's really important is, what do you want to do next? And that's the big question. And what do you want to do next is not always easy to answer. Because it requires to do several things. One of which is, okay, I have to separate my skills from my job. And I also have to do a little bit of introspection. And most of us, raising families, having partners, volunteering in our community, doing our job, life is very busy. Life is very full. Introspection, who's got time for that? But you can spend a little bit of time every day as you're nearing those traditional retirement years to think about, what is it I would like to do next? Now, you're not on your own doing this. Your most valuable asset is your network. Now, you may not think of it as a network, but these are the people that you knew over the years at the temple and church and former colleagues. And even think about, call back your college roommate What did I say I wanted to do when that late night at midnight that we, or maybe it was 2 or 3 in the morning. Yeah, probably more likely 2 or 3 in the morning. What did I say I wanted to do? What really mattered to me at that point? And the thing about your network, what they will help you do is think about what it is you're good at, right? And we all have our own self-delusions. So the thing is, they'll also help you cut through some of your self-delusions. And they'll think about what is it that's going to, that you might really do. And the other aspect of that is they will then get you the job. Because the research shows, I think about 50% of all jobs come through a referral, a network. But if you're talking about people 60 and over, 55 and older, I think it's a much higher percentage. So your network will make those introductions that will lead to a job. And so that, I would say, plan, think about what you want to do next, tap into your network, and then realize, so I'm 65 and I have very white hair. You can't see that, but I have very white hair. So I'm at the age where young college graduates come to me and they say, can I meet with you for an informational interview? I said, fine, love to. I love it. And we'll have a conversation. They know what a job is. But what they're asking is, what is this career thing? And they want a job. They want a career. They want to do something that they feel good about. That's something that's going to make a difference. So they want to be financially independent, but they want to do something that matters. Now, I'm betting that you've all had that same conversation and you reward that, you applaud that, and you try and help them think that through. In doing the book and my work, I've had so many similar conversations with people who are 60 plus. It's the exact same conversation. I need a paycheck. I need an income coming in, but I want to do something that I want to put my feet on the ground in the morning, and I want to be doing this work, and I think this work is making a difference. And so I think this is wonderful. Now, the only difference between the 20-something and the 60-something is that to the 20-something, time is infinity. They have a long time. At 60-something, you're aware that time is short, and that adds to its own pressure. So here what you do want to have is have an experimental mindset, an entrepreneurial mindset. It doesn't matter whether you're going to be an entrepreneur or not. It should have that entrepreneurial mindset. And recognize you're probably going to have to make a couple of pivots, and that's okay. Make those pivots. That's a good thing. And it's part of learning, it's part of being curious, and it's part of continuing to earn a paycheck, and it's part of finding your purpose. The other thing that I just do want to emphasize is a lot of this conversation is about what can individuals do. And we also need societal change because, we can only do so much, right? So our health and our pension systems, they just need to be redesigned for a population that's going to have multiple careers. Think about it. Marissa and I were talking earlier. Someone who graduates from the University of Minnesota in 2019, it is not unreasonable for them to think about a 60-year career. And the notion that they're going to work at one place for those 60 years, no, they're not going to. They're not going to want to. And also probably there'll be various points of time where their employer will decide, well, you're not going to. So you need this mobile, and we need training and retraining throughout a lifetime. And one of the things that I'm excited about is I think colleges and universities also need the change. Because if you look at colleges and universities, they're largely geared toward people between 18 and 24. And then there's another little group that's, 28 up to 30. But, by and large, at age 30, that's pretty much it. So my forecast is that in 30 years, colleges and universities are going to be multi-generational institutions. And graduates are going to be coming back in their 50s and their 60s, not just to take that Renaissance Italy class that they never took, that they always wanted to take, but to pick up a skill, to get a certificate in order to do another job, to make some sort of career transition. And there are these experiments that are going on that are wonderful. The Advanced Career Initiative here at the University of Minnesota, where it's a program where you want to make a mid-career shift toward the nonprofit sector. And, they're really doing, Phyllis Mohn and Kate Schaefer are doing wonderful work there. Notre Dame has its Inspired Leadership Initiative. And again, theirs is more, so you're in your 50s, 60s, early 70s, you want to do something else, you're not quite sure what it is, they create an environment for you to think about it. And so There's a program at Stanford. There's a program at Harvard. And these are experiments that are going on. But I think what we're seeing is the silos coming down. So this sort of traditional notion of you go to school, you work, and you retire, embrace leisure for the rest of your life, that's breaking down. And so hopefully what we end up with is a world where we have more leisure throughout a life, we have multiple careers throughout a life, and we have multiple moments where we are involved in the education system. So one of the things I just want to sort of end remarks, and I just want to leave it on this note. Well, that was the institutional. So is that this one comes from Tyler Cohn, and he's an economics professor at George Mason University. And he said, I would suggest that the ability to spot, mobilize, and deploy older workers is the next biggest source of competitive advantage in the US. The sober reality is that many companies should retool their methods to fit better with the experience and sound judgment found so often in older workers. And what he was dismissing was the fear of automation and artificial technology. He said, that's not the challenge. The challenge is mobilizing your older workers. So I think we are at that Ben Bernanke was right. We're at a historic juncture. It's exciting. There's a lot of experiments going on. And we're really not quite sure how this is going to end. But one way of looking at it is my youngest is 26 years old. So, wow, how did that happen? Anyway, he's 26 years old. Wonderful. But when he's 50, he's going to have a very different idea about what to do post 50 than I think I did or people of my generation did when we reached 50, because our discussion was all about when are you going to retire and can you afford to retire? And I think his conversation is going to be about what do I want to do next?
Wow. Thank you, Chris, so much for that
conversation. Thank you.
I was scribbling down notes so fast with so many thoughts and ideas and things to think about later on. And we've got some questions coming in, and we'll invite folks that have questions to continue submitting them. But as they're coming in, I'm going to ask mine.
Okay. That's okay. Sure, that's fine.
I loved how you talked about the individual changes and the societal changes are needed. And on the kind of societal level, I feel like we've been hearing a lot about how workplaces are catering to their millennials with, open floor plans and beer in the break room and, video games and nap pods and all that. What do you think workplaces can do to foster a great environment for older workers too?
Yes, so I think there's a couple of things. One is, and this is related, so there's also been this growth. And it's one of the most exciting changes in our society is this growth of entrepreneurial ecosystems, the co-sharing workspaces, the incubators, the accelerators. Now, with that conversation and those ads that are surrounding, it's always, someone these incredible abs, and they're sort of running through the mountains of Colorado or running through the Boundary Waters, hiking with their canoe. If you actually visit most of them, I would say 40% is probably 45 and older. But that's not the image. That's not the discussion that's out there. And so I think these innovation districts, I think these incubators, I think these accelerators, the people who are running them have got to include older workers because they're 26% of your new entrepreneurs. Why aren't you welcoming them into your group? They're being welcomed as mentors, but they're not being welcomed as creators. So they're in there. In the workplace, one of the things that I think so many companies do, and I recognize money can be an issue, but there's this thing, universal design. And I was out at Herman Miller, and Herman Miller is the Aeron chair, and they do a lot in design. And I'd gone out there. They're in Zeeland, Michigan. The reason why I'd gone out there is they had published a lot of work about older workers and lighting and tables and everything else like that. And so I went out there, and what they said is, look, here's the thing. What we've realized is, no, if it's good for the older worker, it's good for the younger worker, and vice versa. And there's a wonderful example. You can look at the Harvard Business Review. It was a couple years ago, but if you use your search engine, Harvard Business Review, BMW. And there's a wonderful story there. Professors, they went, and Germany has an older than the US workforce. And so BMW got upset about or worried about what does that mean for the future productivity. So they created what they called the pensioners line, which would be illegal here in the US, but they created a pension. You can do that in Germany, created a pensioners line. And it was to reflect the workforce of the future. And the initial runs is in Dilfendorf, Germany. And the initial runs, productivity was down relative to its other assembly lines. And then they invested the equivalent of $50,000, which I don't know, would that buy you one BMW, maybe a low-end BMW? It's a $100 billion company, $50,000. And they invested in sort of like barbershop chairs, larger screens, I think it was bamboo or corkboard, yoga, meditation. And the productivity of that line now matches the productivity of its other lines. And what they told me is that they took that experience and moved it around elsewhere around the world at other productions, because even though a young person can power through a lot of things, why would you want them to do it? You end up with, workman's comp issues and stuff like that. So I think thinking about universal design, thinking everything through, what's good for old people is good for young people and vice versa. So what Herman Miller, they were talking about in design, you don't have to use knobs. No one really looks at a handle and says, oh, that's for old people. Right. I mean, you have a nicely designed handle, you open the door. So, and some of the lighting adjustments that you make, some of the desk size adjustments that you make. So I really think that it's about being conscious and about thinking, but the way that you're thinking about it is you're creating a multi-generational environment. And the thing about that multi-generational environment is that's actually what so many places actually have. And I was doing some reading in the whole wellness programs. And this one group, they really went out and surveyed workers and what do they want about wellness. And you know what? It was what they wanted was better lighting. They wanted more quiet rooms. What they were talking about was nothing particularly fancy. It was like block and tackling toward having a good environment.
That's all great points and really interesting. Here is another question that came in. How do you get around people looking for you to do free programs or volunteer services after being in a career for years? I now charge for my services.
Yes, and I'm glad that you charge for your services, and it's a good question. So, as in all these things, it's so easy to sort of here's a general answer, and then dealing with specific circumstances can be a very different story. But there is this desire among many people to work in the nonprofit sector, public health sector, education sector, where you're giving back. And so the way that I would approach it is think about, okay, I'm going to volunteer. And the reason why I'm going to volunteer is I believe in this. But the other thing is you put on an additional hat. Not just is this a cause I believe in, but do you like the way the place is run? Because there are many nonprofits that are really good causes, fairly effective. You don't want to work for these people, right? And we know, so you put on a different hat. And then if you say, this is an organization that I'd like to work with, you open that conversation. And and there may not be an opening there. But the thing is, if you start that conversation and you've been doing good work, what they'll say is, we don't have anything, but let me introduce you to so-and-so. So you start getting an avenue into a different sector where you don't have connections. Years ago, I did an interview with Ralph Warner, and he was the founder of Nolo.com. So Nolo is it's a nonprofit self-help legal organization, really wonderful stuff. And he was very involved he lived in Berkeley, and he was very involved in preserving the Bay Area, and particularly the waters and the environmental movement. And he said, we have so many people, they show up at our door, they're 70 years old, had a wonderful career, they're really smart, they show up and they want to volunteer because they retired. And it's great, and we welcome them in. But he says, some other people around age 60, they start showing up, they start doing some stuff. By the time they're 65, we're begging them to retire because we know what it is they can do. We know what they can do for our organization. So I think it's looking at your volunteering work. Yes, you're volunteering, that's a good thing, but you're really looking at it as, do I want to work here? And if I want to work here, raise your hand. and recognize you may not get the job there,
Mhm.
but push people to open doors for you elsewhere.
Kind of part of that pivot mindset that you were talking about
Exactly.
earlier. Interesting. A question came in about how this conversation applies to the agriculture industry. And do you hear anything about aging agricultural producers investing in automation to be able to stay on the farm? Can they afford it? You talked a little bit about how this conversation is changing because we're moving away from mostly physical labor to a more
Yes.
intellectual workforce, but how do you think this does apply to?
So there's so many things going on in the farm community right now. Excuse me, and incomes have been down for years. The trade war is really having an impact. The cost of equipment has gotten so high. I think so if you look at the recent data, which is a couple of months old now, from the agricultural department, their census data, there are two things that are going on. The big are getting bigger, and there's been an explosion of small farms. So these are, local, typically I would imagine organic, fairly responsive to the local market. The middle is what's getting squeezed out, which happens in so many cases because they don't have quite enough land to spread out their costs. And they don't, and yet the cost of equipment is so much, and they're competing in bigger markets and can't be as nimble as the little one. So that's a trend that's going on that's really disturbing. But what you are seeing in rural America is an increasing concentration on getting people in the second half of life to move into rural America and start a business or to take over a business. So that I did a story out in Nebraska because the barbershop was going to close. And then a younger person came in, took it over because they had moved there. And so there's a lot of discussion going on. This isn't directly to the farm, but there's a lot of discussion going on with rural America. And typically with rural America, there's a brain drain for young people. They leave. But there's some very interesting research out of the University of Minnesota Crookston by Ben Winchester. And what he's been documenting is that there's a reverse flow 40 and over, that people do move back into rural areas. And typically they want to start a business, they want to be doing something, and it's more practical for them to do it. So I think in this whole conversation that we're having, there was an interesting conference called Radically Rural. It was in New Hampshire about 2 weeks ago. And one of the themes was just on this: how do we encourage more entrepreneurship in the rural areas? Because farmers are entrepreneurial by definition. And the other thing is farmers don't retire. But there is no such thing as a retired farmer. But the farm community itself is smaller. And there are some real economic forces that are going on that extend. Automation right now, they're investing a lot in automation because it's getting harder and harder to get the labor.
One more question here is around, you mentioned current trends are that companies are reducing the workforce by eliminating positions of their older experienced workers. This person's saying they're not seeing the efforts to retain. Is that trend to retain older employers in its early stages? Yes,
it is in its early stages. And really, it depends on the industry. So if you look at the hospital industry, for example, hospital industry has made a big adjustment over the past 2-3 decades. So hospital industry used to be, okay, you want to go part-time work, goodbye, right? Now for doctors, nurses, doesn't matter. Because they really do need workers, that they have made enormous adjustments. Manufacturing, high skill manufacturing, again, because of this need of skill. And there was, for manufacturing, there's like a 2-decade period where younger people weren't going into. So there's a really gap around, they don't have a whole lot of 40-year-olds. They have a lot of 60-year-olds, they have a lot of 20-year-olds. So they really need to keep that 60 plus around. So Herman Miller had a program that was very successful for them because they have an older than normal manufacturing workforce, and they make everything in America. And so what they had was a program it wasn't age limited, but the only people who took advantage of it were 55 and older. So you could take up to 12 weeks off consecutively, had to be consecutive a year. So you could do 3 weeks, you could do it, but up to 12. And you didn't lose your health insurance or your terms of service for your pension. And what they found is that people kept coming back. But what people are doing is starting a business out of the garage, moving their parents down to Florida, doing a project that they've been wanting to do at the house, taking some sort of trip that they wanted to do, but they kept coming back. And it was one of their best retention techniques. Now, they make money, they have a skilled workforce, they've invested a lot in that workforce, so they have a need to keep it. One of the, a colleague of mine, Carol Heimowitz, and if you go online to Bloomberg Business Week, it might have been in Bloomberg. Anyway, she did a story about one of the unexpected places where all of a sudden older workers are in high demand, which is Hollywood. Now, not on screen, but if you think about it, it's the effect of a new technology called streaming. So if I remember a number right, last year Netflix did 700 original programs. And then you multiply that by all the other players in there. So all of a sudden these baby boomer screenwriters and writers who were finding their phones not being answered, all of a sudden they're in huge demand because they know how to write a script, they know how to work in a writing room, they know how to read a deadline. Same thing for the audio engineer, same thing for the camera person. And so a lot of it really depends on the industry. So what I'm talking about is early stages when we're thinking about the whole economy, and this is the tight labor market. But in certain industries, you have had greater progress.
One more question. What about older workers returning to college to finish their bachelor's degree at last? Work in business. This person says they work in business administration. Their career is stalled out. While they were able to rise to a mid-level management position without the bachelor's degree, they can no longer compete with the younger workers who are coming in with their degrees. Yeah,
that's a real issue. And I don't, this is one of the things where I don't understand managements. I mean, if you have the experience, you can do the job, and obviously you demonstrate it. But you're absolutely right. There is that prejudice out there. So here's what I'd be weighing. Okay, if you finish your degree, your bachelor's degree, what's that going to lead you to versus getting a certificate in program management or certificate in nonprofit fundraising or whatever that, dividing things out and sort of weigh the different costs and time commitment. But this is where you're really going to have to, I would figure out beforehand, what is this going to lead to? And spend a lot of time thinking about, is finishing my bachelor's degree the better path to get to where I want to go? Or is it getting a certificate that sort of will also perhaps get me there? And then weigh the costs and the time commitment. And it may very well be that the answer is the bachelor's degree, but I would run through different scenarios because that bachelor's degree will take time.
Yeah. And it connects to kind of what we were talking about before we started the webinar too, with careers lasting longer and being more multifaceted. There's a lot of different ways to advance your education further down the road beyond just getting another bachelor's.
Exactly.
So a couple just housekeeping questions came in that I can take care of. A question about the recording. So we'll share the recording of this webinar with all the attendees and registrants probably later this afternoon, and it will also be posted on the Alumni Association's website.
Great.
So you can share it broadly because you learned so much. And then a question about the University of Minnesota's resources for folks looking to prepare for retirement. A lot of our alumni and listeners to our webinar series are University of Minnesota faculty and staff. And at the Alumni Association, we just had a presentation 2 weeks ago from the University of Minnesota Retirees Association, which is an association of retirees who provide a whole range of services that I had no idea about for retirees. So I would encourage this person who's asking about kind of resources and workspace for retirees to reach out to them for more information. They're a member-driven organization located right in McNamara, and that's the University of Minnesota alumni, or University of Minnesota Retirees Association.
And the Advanced Career Initiative may also have some information on their website.
And human resources.
And human resources, yeah.
So Chris just put up his contact information there. I don't know if you want to add anything about how to stay connected.
So the person who says he's a Brain Trust member of the Max Planck Institute for Neuroscience in Jupiter, Florida, I'd love to go speak at one of your programs. So
we'll put you in contact with after today's conversation. Thanks for seeing that one. And lots of other comments came in just commenting on how great the content was today and how
Thank you.
useful it will be going forward. And in terms of other resources, look, check out your books, of course, right? Purpose and a Paycheck. Want to thank you so much for taking the time today to talk with our alumni, and looking forward to continuing to share this conversation with our alumni community in the future. I'll just click ahead to remind you about our upcoming webinars that you can check out, and then another thank you to our members. And with that, we will say, I hope you have a great afternoon, everyone.
Bye everyone.
Now.
Thank you.